Hey everybody, it's Thursday.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Bite.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And we're here tonight. And I think we're going to do some talking about fishing. We have some guests who they requested to be on tonight, but I think something came up for them. So I think we're going to end up rescheduling for them.
Yep.
But we always start with the fishing report. And so I think we are going to do just that. And, the funny thing is we talked last week about how we ended up the Sunday prior fishing for bass and how I was like kind of grumpy about it and whatever. Well, so this past weekend, I worked on Saturday and the rest of the day, I don't know, weather was, we just ended up being busy. And we didn't hit the water on Saturday. But on Sunday, we went out there. And what actually happened is I started the day fishing for crappies, but using the bait that I had otherwise put on for bass. And that was a pretty fun thing and a little bit, well, I was going to say unexpected. I guess not that unexpected. I hoped. But we found ourselves in a lake where I knew at this time of year it was a strong minnow bite. And I guess there is a good bug bite there too, which is interesting, but I was thinking minnows. And so what happened is I had, was it a 3-inch paddle tail, something just very minnowy, like a white tummy and a gray top. And it was on, I think we talked about it the week before, like the Northland, because it has the spinner on it and I couldn't remember what it's called. And we talked about this then too, how funny. But I used that same exact setup and I tossed it out pretty far away from the boat, to be honest. And as it was coming back in, I felt that tap. And so I set the hook and it was there. And Josh was so kind to net the fish. And I put it on a bump board and it was like a full 13 and a half, which is a super great fish. But we knew then that we were in a good spot for other fishing, for more fish. So that's what we did. And I guess I jumped right over water temps and all those things. So I guess where were we at? Do you remember?
Well, the notable thing about that was, I parked the truck like I usually do after you pull the boat off. And then I'm standing on shore and Emily is just like, she's looking at the screen, tapping the hummingbird, like looking over the boat, like looking at the screen. And I'm standing like in the water in my boots, like, come on, we got to go fishing. And then she finally sees me. She pulls up and then she's like, hey, what do you think the water temperature is? And I was like, I don't know. So I guess like 3-4 times. And I was about 15 degrees off on the high side. So the weekend before we were fishing, granted, it was like we said last week, 11 feet deep, but this lake only gets to 18. So it's not like super, super.
It is deeper. Tannic. They're two different bodies of water, but the temperatures were so
it was like
different.
It was like 15 degrees cooler. It was like 60 degrees. And it said 59 and then bounced back and forth between 59 and 60. And I was like, holy smokes, I was not expecting that. And so then we just kind of had to play off that because this lake, this is a lake that we're fairly familiar with, but we just hadn't been on it all year. So we haven't caught, any fish out of this lake. We have no reference as to where they would be. And we just kind of pulled out and went and checked some spots. And yeah, it was interesting when you caught that first one. Like I had something smaller on. We'd marked some fish on the side scan and the 2D and just put it in park while we just kind of got our stuff together. And you were casting out and I was setting up and you caught that fish. And I was like, kind of sent the boat into like, panic mode. Let's get some more baits out there. And so we kind of got that going. And right after your cast, and I got a 13. And then we went back and forth catching like crappies for, I don't know, like 20 minutes. And then it kind of shut down. There was fish still roaming around. That was the thing about the bite was that the fish, it wasn't a group of fish, right? It was like a couple groups of fish and they were all swimming around. And it was just like blind fan casting all over. And
well, so you're making a good point because the fish were really moving around. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we at first tried to do is target these groups of fish that we were seeing. And so at first we were like, set up for bobbers and throwing that kind of bait out there, because I would say that they didn't like the bait ripped past them really super fast. And
No.
I think that's what led us to throwing the bobbers out there. But the problem is that when the fish are like, I don't know, 12 or more feet down,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're putting something really heavy on there, I don't know, it's a little bit hard to get down that far that fast. And so when we're saying that these fish are moving around, we would try to cast in front of them and still somehow always seem to miss them. And it's like you could only predict so far out in front of those fish. And so we found that we were much more successful when we were casting, because if we can get that bait to fall in front of those fish right as they were coming by, then that was always a really super successful bite. The times that we had the bobber out and they did come across it, that was successful as well. But I wouldn't say that I found like a magic ticket for the day. Like it was kind of just one-offs here and there. And to be honest, I did a lot of switching of baits. So even though I got that one great fish right away on that color, that presentation, I, I tossed it out a few more times and knew I needed something new. And so at that point we did a lot of switching. And did you have a consistent bait for the day, or you also switched?
No, both of us keep 4 rods in the boat, each set up with something a little different, and I just kind of switch between the 4 all day, switch profiles. And that was the weird thing, like once the bite, when we first pulled up, I think what we had hit was kind of the tail end of the morning bite. And so like it didn't really seem to matter what you threw in the water, they were just eating. And as the day progressed, it wasn't all that sunny, I don't think. It was like partly cloudy, so it'd get a little bit of sun and then be mostly cloudy and then back and forth. And I don't know if we ever really found that they started actually eating that much again. Like we'd pick a couple here and there and we'd tool around the lake, check some other spots that we've had success in the past, just check some other spots that we haven't necessarily fished very much, but are very similar to where we had fished that morning. And yeah, it just seemed like fish kind of spread out during the day. And
so for that midday bite, one of the things, or I guess 2 of the things that we found is that if we were fishing over structure, wood, that's when we found more bass. I wouldn't say it was amazing bass bite, but that is what we were finding there. And then mid-afternoon, we were also kind of casting outside of some deep weeds. And in that case, we used our bobbers as well, but we took those bobber stops and we shortened it way up, right? Because what happens is that we were fishing the water depth was probably 12 feet or something. It was 12, 15 feet, but the weeds came up to about 10 feet or so. And I was fishing like about 5 feet down. So just right above those deep weeds. And so the nice thing about that slip bobber setup is that you can take that and like kind of pop it back. You don't have to let that bobber be stagnant and sit there, right? And so what happens is there's plastic on the end of that, and that tail wiggles right along the way there, and we were catching bluegills.
Yeah, we went and found some of them. I don't know, I only probably caught like 1 or 2 because I just tried to stick with some of the bigger baits as the day went on, just trying to cast around. You actually caught a pike.
I was actually just
which was kind of interesting since we don't normally, we know there's pike in there. We know there's good pike in there, but we've never really seen many of them. So that was pretty fun.
Yeah. And then after all of that, and we did go back and we tried to track down those crappies, and there was a few of them there. But I think to some extent it left us debating a little bit if they had pushed into the weeds or pushed back out or this or that. The other thing that we talked a lot about on the way home is that the days prior, there had been quite a bit of wind. And so it felt like Sunday we were blessed that there was not all that much wind. And so you joked, and I don't know if it was a joke or if it was real, but you're like, maybe it's just the first day that the wind stopped enough that they could eat. Right. But I don't know if there's something to that, right? But there very well could be. And I've kind of been wondering about that ever since. And the funny thing is we won't probably be able to figure out part of that puzzle because ever since this past weekend, we have not continued on the trend of the cool down. I would say that we have been like fairly consistent, if not a smidge of a warm up. What do you know about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think from what the weather's been predicting, I think we've been kind of dodging the warm up a little bit. It didn't get nearly as sunny today, but I think they're still calling for low to mid 80s this weekend. So that surface temp is going to be up. I imagine that fish might be pushed a little shallower. We'll see. Maybe we'll run into like a de facto topwater bite. I don't know. The minnows, like,
Pushing up to the warm water.
That's what you're looking for. You're looking for those big bait balls this time of year because a lot of the bugs are starting to slow down, and the forage, what fish are looking for is generally bigger, the more bang for their buck. And so yeah, a lot of those mid-depth transitions, maybe even over in some lakes, it might be basin fishing already, depending on the temp. But those, maybe we might get lucky. Those little baby fish might be up at the top. Might be able to get a bite on my jerk bait finally.
Oh my gosh. But I think that we do have some other fun things planned for this weekend, so you never know what it's going to turn into. I think I'm also working a little bit Saturday again, so I don't know, we plan around that, and so that's going to be fun in case there's anyone at home that we're going to see. Then we're excited for that. But otherwise, I think one of the things I'm doing in my tackle box this time of the year is I'm not necessarily downsizing, so I'm making sure that I'm stocked up on all my, dare I say, good sized baits. I don't know, leech plastics and all kinds of minnows and stuff. So getting ready for the weekend, and if the boat can be packed, then that helps. That helps us hit the water.
Yep, it's the time of year to throw those jerk baits. If you've listened to the podcast and you haven't tried hover rigs yet, this is the time of year. Get those 3 or 4 inch flukes out. Put a hover rig jig from Core Tackle inside of it. Cast that around. You'll be surprised that we've caught bluegills on 3-inch baits using that thing. So it's just amazing how big of a presentation you can get bites in this time of year. Yeah. So I don't, like we said at the beginning of the show, unfortunately our guest couldn't show up tonight. So yeah, we didn't really have anything else planned, and so we'll try to get them back on the schedule. And yeah, I didn't really have much else for everybody tonight. So
yeah, to be honest, I think that's kind of where we're gonna have to leave it, and that's okay because there's a great weekend a weekend. Good weather coming up this weekend. I don't know how I was going to put that.
Great weather weekend.
Yeah, great weather. Sure. And so hopefully it's the time of the year. I know people are just like taking out boats and docks and all of those things, but take a minute, get out on the water, catch a fish or two, right? Especially because I think right now is Thursday night and Packers are playing, I think, to be honest, right now, right? So if you're in Wisconsin, that's a thing that's going on. But the other thing is that might leave you a little bit more available this weekend. And so hopefully you'll have time for those adventures.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll bring you our fishing report next week as well as, I don't know, all kinds of good stuff to come. And thanks for joining us on this week's edition of The Night Bite.
Night, everybody.